Welcome to another episode of Stewart Squared, where me and my father investigate the early personal computing industry, the internet, and the mobile revolutions to try to understand where we're headed with the AI revolution. And last week we had my uncle on, and both my uncle and my dad were talking about the last one, which is a program that was developed on BASIC in 1980s, in the early 1980s, saying this is the last program, and they invested a bunch of money in advertising inside InfoWorld, I believe it was the newsletter that you used to edit, and basically tried to create what we may have right now with LLMs. And I've probably created 5 or 6 applications in the past week using only Claude and a little bit of OpenAI, and basically navigating this whole thing, just building a bunch of programs with natural language. So it seems like we might be there. But what do you think?
So it was 1981, on a 43 years ago. And it wasn't a newsletter. I moved to California before you were born, to become editor of InfoWorld, which was a weekly newspaper. And it was very popular at the time. And it was really more like hacker news than IT or other domains. But it was people had like gotten into computers, wanted to know what was going on every week. And every week something new would happen. And so it was a really exciting time if you were into that. But this program showed up called The Last One. We just looked it up. It was called DJAI. So this is 1981, and there's no internet. Even if you were inside a company, the computers weren't connected. These personal computers hadn't gotten into big companies. So you're sitting there on your computer, which has a little bit of memory and a little bit of storage and a little bit of processing power. And this guy had come up with the last one. You never need a program again because you could just tell it what, and it would produce basic.
It's prompting.
Hmm?
He was prompting it.
For language. It was like you talk to it or type to it, and it would create a program in BASIC for you. And it would be the last time you ever need to have a program. It's hard to imagine at this time, because in the intervening 43 years, we did get the internet. Well, the personal computers became much more powerful. We did get the internet. Personal computers kept getting more powerful. And then 2007, the iPhone showed up, and, the rest is history. And the internet got really fast where you could get it. And all of this stuff happened. And it was the accumulation of all these things that led to this idea that you can scrape all the data in the world and train large language models to respond to natural language input. But, it's not just natural language. It's also neural networks, and it's the LLMs, and it's the transformers, and all of the different bits and pieces that have accumulated in AI over the time. So this dream of an intelligent agent, or, something you can interact with, has been true pretty much ever since computers were developed, originally in the 40s and 50s. And, people started thinking, well, if it can do this, then what else can it do? And it's always been a process of that. In the 80s, with the personal computer, there was an idea that PCs were the key to it. But it didn't work because it didn't have enough data, basically. And you didn't know about neural networks that came along later, and certainly didn't know about transformers, or, and you get into the subset of things that LLMs need, like RAG and all the other stuff. So the last one was, it was kind of a joke, because they were these back page ads on the magazine I was editing, and others, called The Last One. And it was basically the last program you ever need to buy, because it'll do everything for you. And they went out of business and disappeared. So it was like this brief moment. And during the 80s, at that time, there was a notion that you could do a form of artificial intelligence. It was the first AI boom 40 years ago. So there were a bunch of companies, mostly around Boston. This is what
Expert
your
systems.
uncle.
Expert systems. Is that what they're called? Expert systems? Is that what?
That was a piece. Natural language was a piece of it. You could talk to them, and the expert system would know what to tell you.
Yeah.
but they didn't have neural networks yet. They didn't have collections of computers. It was all done on a single machine.
Yeah.
And so it didn't work, right? A lot of venture capital money was blown on the early AI companies. Actually, the company called Symantec was the result of that, but that's a whole nother story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You have to figure out what Symantec was before it became Symantec. Actually, I mean, I'll explain it because it's actually relevant, but and it's probably was more like in the 90s. The company before Symantec that became Symantec was trying to do a natural language system with expert systems that there was still, the internet hadn't happened yet, that could figure out what you wanted. And the problem was that it had to be all coded, hard coded, right, to make it happen. And inevitably, in designing the system, there would be a hole, and they called it a black hole, and you drop into it and couldn't get back out to the top again. And so it didn't work, right? But it did work in certain applications that Symantec ended up being a security company that protected your computer from viruses and stuff. That was the early Symantec.
Network.
Used the technology, they reused it to build this protection for personal computers because they were being connected at the time. So
Go for it.
anyway, it was a side trip because it didn't work. So they went off and they started a company that was pretty successful. And I can't remember who bought Symantec, but it's now part of a bigger company, McAfee, something.
Interesting. Brings in McAfee. There's some various things that you said that I want to investigate, like the fact that you said InfoWorld was like Hacker News, and like what that was like in the early 1980s. But then there's this sort of secular historical process that sounds really interesting, which is new thing gets invented. Everybody sees the potential of that new thing. Everybody's wrong on the time. Yet all the same people just kind of recycle. And General Magic is a great movie for that.
Yeah.
And so where does venture capital come into that? Because now it feels like, particularly given the last few weeks where now I am able to program things, I now have no limiting beliefs on what I can build. I have accurate beliefs on the limits of LLMs to help me build various things.
I'm going to challenge you on that.
Go.
Because you're building something for yourself, right? You've done this translation program. You've done this news feed program. So that's a simple thing.
Yeah.
The essence of really functional software is much deeper than that and requires multiple layers and whole systems. And I don't believe that LLMs can build that kind of program for you. They can't go and build a new social media program that millions of people will use. And particularly because it has to be coded for a particular platform and can't just be on the web. And so you've gotten a little bit into it, right? You can see the possibilities, so you're very excited. This is actually exactly what you were talking about. You're seeing the possibility of something and you're getting excited about it. And it is what's happened with AI. So the role of venture capital plays is ever increasing. There was very little venture capital in the 80s. It was like the first formal venture capital firms were formed in the 1970s, Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia was a little later, and after that. The original venture capitalists were actually individuals that had a lot of money. A guy named General Dorio in Massachusetts and a guy named Arthur Rock in California. And they started funding companies, but they would write a check for $400,000. That would be the starting point. This is for like semiconductor companies and really complicated technologies, but and that would pay off. Like the original investment in Apple, I think was less than $1 million, but I can't totally remember. You could probably ChatGPT or Claude could tell you, but and Arthur Rock wrote that check, and then there were subsequent financings. But the over time from 1980 to say 2020, in those 40 years, the amount of venture capital has expanded in a geometric fashion. I can't remember exactly how.
Exponentially.
Logarithmic fashion. It's like now where you would be writing checks for $100,000 or $200,000, and that would be enough. Now you have to start with, 2 or 3 million or more. And in AI, seed checks are oh, $1 billion, whatever.
Well, and that's really interesting, that specific point, because from my understanding, a lot of the investors, and it might have to do with the zero interest rates or the habits that were built from zero interest rates. Like the only thing that they're investing in right now is AI. And I don't think AI has, like, it is revolutionary, but it
Actually,
doesn't.
if you pay
Yeah.
attention, that very topic is now being bandied about because the valuations that have been set for AI companies cannot be supported by their fundamental results.
Yeah.
So OpenAI is raising money and theoretically at $100 billion valuation, but it has like it'll have like 4 or 5 billion of revenue this year, something like that.
Yeah.
And you can kind of like squint your eyes and go, okay, well, that'll probably end up being worth, trillions, and therefore it's a reasonable thing. But that's OpenAI. That's not Anthropic. That's not
Yeah.
the others. And a lot of the money that they're getting is from strategic partners, and they're doing these very rich buyouts where they're paying off the VCs and hiring the people.
Yeah.
So there's a real question about the valuations of AI companies, and this is like super fast, right? It started in November of
2 years ago. Yeah.
and here we're in 2024, less than 2 years. The whole cycle's right,
Yeah.
woof,
Yeah.
and then back, and it's going now, and people are beginning to back off because they can't support these valuations. They can't see how they'll ever end up making money, and
that's
that's what I mean by
Okay.
venture capital went from being very thoughtful,
Yeah.
small, risk-taking, invest in companies that have intellectual property so that if it doesn't work, you can sell the IP, to over time, step by step, to the point where it's like, it really is an accelerant. It's like if you burn a house, you use an accelerant to make it burn fast. It's like a way to burn a lot of money really fast. And some of us old people think that's not kind of the deal with venture capital. Now, what's really going on is there's still all the other stuff going on, but it's not visible. There are still enterprise software companies being funded. There's still, technology companies being funded. A lot of it is defense, and that's also a big deal. And so, there is this tendency to focus on the thing that's most visible, but there's still this whole infrastructure.
Well, there's so many things we can go into that, but I'll try to limit myself to the one that's the most interesting, which is the fact that we have social media that's interjected into this whole process. You were writing for a newsletter in the 1980s. You're editing a newsletter. You're writing during the 80s and the 90s.
I got fired from InfoWorld and I started a newsletter. So I wrote a newsletter from 1983 to basically 93.
And this goes into what you sent me these great articles that my grandfather wrote. And just so starting in 2006, 2007, everything changed, not necessarily in a good way, where everyone was now hyper aware and anybody could publish, which is kind of interesting. That's cool that anybody can publish, but it also leads to what you just said of hyper focused sort of on inane stuff. Everybody's attention, oh, there's so much money. They're having all the venture capital raising parties. They're doing all these things like, oh, that's really sexy and everything. And so it draws huge amounts of attention. And it's really hard to then separate out from what is the glamour versus what are these interesting things. Like you mentioned, defense companies, space companies, all of these other things. I think I have insight into how this works because I've seen what you've done in terms of it doesn't feel like you got caught up in that whole thing. Can you talk about that? What happened in 2006? How did it change everything?
So 2006 is 6 years after the internet bubble burst, which was 2000, right? In the 96 to 2000 period, there was a bubble, and it wasn't just interest rates. It was like, whoa, look at this internet stuff. This is going to change the world. And everything took off. And at that time, I remember thinking like, wow, these people are like funding companies at 60 or $70 million valuations. This is insane.
Yeah.
Some of them like became billion-dollar companies and paid. So there was the VCs had to learn that there was a different set of valuations, but it is a cycle you're referring to. It's like little stuff starts to happen, and people go, "Wow, this is a big deal," and then it gets bigger and bigger, and then it stops and implodes. So there was the one that led up to 2000, and then from 2000 to 2006, which is when we started our venture firm, it was a wasteland. Right? There was no liquidity. All the venture capital firms were shutting down or reducing the size. Until 2006 was when people started to go, okay, this internet thing, Web 2.0 is the key phrase. and because it started to become graphical more and more, and
graphical, interesting.
on the iPhone was introduced. So this Web 2.0 led into the mobile thing, and that started to accelerate. And then there was an existential event, which was the low interest thing. And that preceded the pandemic. And out of the real estate implosion that happened in 2008 and so on and so forth, it got to the point where the central banks said, in order to keep this economy going, we have to like reduce interest rates, and they brought it down to zero. Basically, it didn't cost you anything to borrow money. So if you wanted to make money, as opposed to being a lender, you'd become an investor and bet on big outcome. This cycle got like this from 2012 to 2022. Like all of the, and that's when social media happened. So the social media companies cycled really fast. You could invest in them, write a big check, and within 3 years get the money back because they all went public and or got bought. And so this cycle happened. And so then in 2022, really when the Ukraine war started, when
the crypto stuff, well, that sparked the crypto stuff, because all crypto was just like the end of that.
So it's kind of social media crypto, and then the central bank started raising interest rates, and that just changed the condition for everything. And the people had been doing it for 10 years. Say you were 22 and you were then 32, you had no experience of anything else, right? So then shut down. So all we've been doing, the people that are inside and know about it, are waiting for the great cycle to start again. And the first thing that happened was AI, when OpenAI introduced ChatGPT 3.5. And people went, oh my God, but it was the only thing, right? The only thing I could focus on was crypto had died. That was the crash in 22.
SaaS, you had SaaS, but
the space defense stuff hadn't started, and it was like that. Wow, AI is everything. So you got all these venture capitalists with all this money going like, whoa, crap, we'll do AI and we'll put lots and lots of money in. I'm trying to remember what Khosla put in money into OpenAI without any idea what the company was organized to. It was like a not-for-profit, and they're putting money into it. Weird, but of course they'll make a lot of money now. But so the big firms with a lot of money that were risk-oriented were writing checks for AI, and that's beginning to back off now. And there's some other stuff going on, but it's a very confusing muddled time right now.
You mentioned something really
will happen that will trigger the next great, what I call the next great cycle.
There's a point that's now gone, but the banks versus venture capital is really interesting, because something interesting happened from my understanding of what goes on in finance when Silicon Valley Bank, the bank that both of us banked at, got lost because they had, let me see if I can resurrect this. They had had a bunch of no interest money. Then the interest rates got risen. And then because they had making a bunch of bets on 0% interest, they now had 5% interest, and that wiped them out. Actually, better to ask you what happened with First Republic, with Silicon Valley Bank. What happened there?
Different reasons for each of them. Silicon Valley Bank did have a debt portfolio of loans they'd made at low interest, long-term loans they'd made at low interest, and they couldn't unload them. And because they were low interest, they couldn't sell them, they couldn't get rid of them. And that changed their economics so fast that that people lost faith, and there was a run on it, and which is what happens in banks. First Republic actually didn't happen at the same time. It happened like 9 months later, because people started looking at every round and going like, oh, if it's Silicon Valley Bank, what else? Right? And there was a crypto bank, Silver something. There was another bank that went out.
Yes, yeah.
Silicon Valley Bank, or maybe just before it. So people started looking at these regional mid-sized banks and going, whoa, my God, these are high-risk operations. And they looked at First Republic, and people were like going, First Republic, it's all rich people that have lots of money, and they're not making that many mortgages, and they're not lending it long-term. It just was a loss of faith. And First Republic, which is really sad, because it was a great model, and it's a First Republic didn't handle it really well, and they ended up, being bought out by J.P. Morgan.
So why didn't
I,
that thing happen to the venture capitalists? Why didn't what happened to Silicon Valley Bank with the risk happen to venture capitalists?
they don't borrow.
They don't borrow. Got it. Yeah. So they've
Capitalists
got a
raise
whole,
money.
yeah, they've got
They
a whole
have
bunch of institutional investors, and those institutional investors are basically looking for to beat
that's a secondary effect
Yeah.
going on, but the line in venture capital is you can only lose 1x your money.
Yeah.
Right. You don't borrow to leverage, right? They're not leveraged,
Yeah.
which happens in hedge funds and private equity, but venture capital is a very pure thing. You get a pool of money, you put the money in, you work with the company, but you don't borrow. You just don't borrow, never borrow.
Got it.
And
Okay.
that's just that.
So two different, fundamentally different things. And we could
Yeah,
talk about, yeah.
banking and investing. It's two different things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is maintained. Now there's a few little edge cases that kind of fell out as a result of not honoring that division, but that's an edge case.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I mean, we're sitting here and we have 4 funds to the ground, and the first fund was great, but we haven't provided liquidity in our next 3 funds. So our LPs are going, when are you going to make some money? And our oldest fund is 15 years old. No, 12 years old. And, so we can tell them when we think we're going to make money, but you can't predict that. Right?
Yeah.
That's because it depends on liquidity. Either your company goes public, or you sell it to someone else. We got that in our first fund, but not in the next 3. So there is a secondary effect and this is affecting all of the venture capitalists. There's ways you can find out what the returns are, but Kozla, for instance, I saw recently, they've been raising billion-dollar funds for more than 10 years, multi-billion-dollar funds. Their rate of return is
interesting. Yes. Yeah. Interesting.
Maybe you really want to put that much money in to get, make 10% on your money, or it's a little bit better than a bank, but a bank is a lot less risky, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of thought here, and understanding the infrastructure, where the money comes from and what the expectations are is really important.
So that brings to mind, I mean, there's one piece that I don't want to forget, which is the fact that AI is sort of a commodity now, particularly with Llama stepping in and putting all that. But I'm going to put a pin in that because you just raised something else, which is
that's the open source issue. But
yeah, the fact that venture capitalists also did not escape the lower interest rates. It's just more confusing to see how they were affected by it.
Well, they were affected by it because they raised huge amounts of money, because people were going like, well, if I get 0.6% interest, I got to do venture capital because I can get, at least 10% of return on my money, which is better than the bank, way better than the bank. But then interest rates have gone up, and it's not 5%. It's like, I think mortgage rates are still like 7%, and short-term money is 10 or 12%, something like that. So the economics were a lot better, a lot less risk.
So there's chaos as well at that level, and now they have to prove in this crazy environment over the past 10 years, they have to prove in order to raise their next rounds. And there's a problem there. And it doesn't seem like, and do you think that the low interest rates led to a total lack of innovation, like over the past 10 years? Like, how does it work? Yeah.
So there is a thesis, and I kind of agree with it, which is that in a low interest rate period, when it was easy to raise capital to invest, the money went to the thing that produced returns fastest, and that was social media, and then crypto. And so, I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried was a part of this, right? He raised a huge amount of money with no diligence. People were just throwing money at him, because he was like this world-beating dude. But that also happened on social media. I mean, Facebook produced incredible returns for Excel, and Facebook then bought Instagram and produced incredible returns for them. And it's like, it was just this rolling thing. And people weren't paying attention to the details for good reason, because they were making money so fast, a lot of money so fast that, then they go raise more funds and they go, look, we just liquidated that 20x. And they'll give us more money. And like the pension funds and all the institutions are sitting there going, well, we can't earn any interest. Real estate, all this other stuff is really hard to do. But look, venture capital, it works really well until I think it was actually 2021 when the crypto crash happened. And by then social media was done, right? So there was this period of time where nothing was happening until November of 22 with OpenAI. So like, and there's all this money sitting there
And
needing to be invested.
and all this stuff has happened before. Like if we look at a long-term historical trend, the tulip mania, that was also the same things that were going on. And this is the whole like, and then we had the gold standard, and then the gold standard kept on. The reason why they say that we removed ourselves from the gold standard is because the gold standard would essentially cause these large booms and busts. I'm not sure that that theory is correct or not.
The gold standard was a standard.
Yeah.
And once the gold standard off as the measurement, then it became the dollar.
Yeah.
Right? The dollar go up and down.
Yeah.
The
So
dollar is the standard now.
there's a conversation we could have about that, because there are some VC funds who do think like you probably, and they might be a little bit quieter, and they are investing in space, and they are investing in these crazy new technologies. And at some point, those things are going to make money, hopefully, because that would be really cool. Like it would just be very exciting if those things. Definitely, defense is making a lot of money at the moment.
Well, Anduril.
Yeah, Anduril.
Anduril, the whole thing right now. Palmer Luckey, who did Oculus and sold it to Facebook and is a billionaire himself, is like doing Anduril, and he's trying to reshape the whole defense infrastructure. Although he's now been forced to work with the prime contractors, so Lockheed Martin, right? People want to work with Anduril. The most interesting one is SpaceX, because came out of nowhere, right? Elon Musk, everything everybody thought was stupid.
Yeah.
He did it initially with Tesla. Well, they did SpaceX and Tesla at the same time, but he, his definition of risk is like way beyond what anybody else's definition of risk is. And he doesn't care, right? As a result of that, and he is who he is. But he has, in fact, built a space company that has outperformed every other space effort at all, even the ones that came after him.
Yeah.
Right? Rocket Lab is, launching 20 times a year now, or 25, something like that. SpaceX is launching 300 times a year, or not quite, but and then he's got the satellite thing going on called Starlink, which is like a whole nother thing, but he's using SpaceX to make it happen by launching his own satellites on his own rockets. I mean, it's hard to imagine. And people are like criticizing Tesla now, but when did he do it? And when did he make it happen? Like none of the car companies were going to touch electric cars. And he made it work. Right?
Yeah.
So there was a period of time I thought it'd be more like DeLorean, which was a really cool company that just failed. So, this thing about risk, this is really interesting. There's a guy named Nate Silver, and I haven't read the book yet, but he just put out a book called On the Edge. He was a poker player, professional poker player, and then he started applying what he knew about poker to politics and polls. And so he has a model for how to predict elections, and it's really interesting to see what he's thinking, because he got the last two right. And this one is like, what the hell's going to happen? This Kamala thing disrupted everything. And everybody's trying to figure out what's going to happen, but there's not enough time, right? It's all happening so fast. They're all going like, bah. But in poker, you have to be on it constantly, right? And he uses all the poker terms, the river and the flop and the stuff like this from whatever it's called.
Let's go back to Musk, because what you said about risk is really interesting, because there's this sort of philosophical debate that I have, and it ties into theories of histories as well, which is that whether the whole thing is just emergent, whether it's just all happening out there and nobody can change it, or whether I think it's called the big man of history type of thing, where it's like you have Stalin, or you have Hitler, and I'm not comparing Elon Musk to either of those. I think Elon Musk's probably much more integrous than those guys, but Musk represents something really interesting, which is that he keeps on doing these large bets, and because that he's proven that he can do them, which is in part because he's done them previously, he then can do the next thing. And
usually what happens is if you take a big risk and do something, you don't want to lose it again. So you stop taking risks.
Yeah. He just keeps on doing it. Yeah.
But he's like rolling the dice over and over again. And it's like, that's actually the way he works. He's like turned it into a thing.
Yeah.
Nobody else can do that. And maybe it's because he's smart and crazy at the same time. It's like, who knows? But
it's crazy.
It's actually an interesting parallel, because it's not totally a black swan because that's a different thing. The something unexpected has to happen for new things to start
Yeah.
happening.
Yep. Yep.
So maybe that was Steve Jobs and Wozniak inventing an Apple, right? Or, maybe it was Ford inventing a truck or, whatever it was, but these things happen and some of them are bad things like pandemics and wars. So Stalin and Hitler.
Yeah.
But some of them are kind of
like the invention of electricity. The invention of electricity, yeah.
They're like stuff happens and nobody expects it to become what it is, or the telegraph. And so these things keep happening, and it's the thing that's not expected, right? So everybody builds up a picture of what's happening that's based on what has already happened, and then something comes in to disrupt that, and that's the kind of essence to this. And Elon Musk is a major disruptor. He both space and electric cars. That's like, holy crap, Steve Jobs is like a brilliant guy, but he only did computers.
Wait. And not only space and other things, but now also Neuralink. I would love to know your impression of Neuralink.
Yeah, like, I don't know, they put something in there, and right now they're doing it to people that have no hope, right? Paraplegic, and they've done it twice.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't, that one's a really hard one to assess because, I don't want to have anything implanted.
I don't think many people do, but that's why it's a great business model, which is that it's for people who there is no hope, and you paraplegics, and then you test it out in paraplegics, and it is pretty impressive. Like I definitely don't want to stop Neuralink from doing what they're doing for those people. But when it comes to me, and the thing that scares me the most is the fact that he also bought Twitter, and that he's also building a AI center in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's not Neuralink, it's the combination of Twitter, which is now an engagement farm, with AI center, with Neuralink. Those three things together seem
great. To my friend at breakfast, which is why we started an hour later, and we were talking about engagement. And I think engagement is over.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting.
What happened in the aughts with Twitter and Facebook, mostly those two, is not happening.
It's totally gone.
People don't really want to engage anymore. And so Twitter is like, now it's still a huge thing. A lot of people look at it, but they're looking at it for news, right? It's for what's happening because it's very fast in reporting the news. And Facebook is much more gentle. They're not like stirring trouble up anymore. They're not stuffing things into your feed to make you, angry.
Interesting.
So that's actually an old thing, and that's just done, right? It might be the Congress who's still focused on it, other people, but that's not what's happening anymore. There is some transference between social media and AI because people are worried that AI, with hallucinating and all this stuff, is going to generate another wave of engagement. I personally don't think it can happen, but Apple is the example of that. They're the way they're designing. Really funny. There's still this meme out here that Apple's 2 years behind OpenAI, when in fact, actually, Apple is just about to change the whole landscape with the next version of iOS.
And that's coming out in the fall, right?
Well, September 9th is their announcement date.
Okay.
They've already talked about Apple Intelligence at Worldwide Developers Conference. So it's actually not going to be in that version of the operating system delivered on whatever it is, September 10th. But it'll be in the first revision of it, which is expected to be in October or November. And it's just a really interesting model, and it's completely different. And it's hard to say who the visionary is at Apple. It's like, doesn't feel like it's Tim Cook, but they've institutionally been able to create this.
Yeah, Steve Jobs implanted visionary thinking into the whole company.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if in the basement of the spaceship there's Steve Jobs's brain still.
Yeah, because they're very secretive, so we don't know what's going on.
You don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so last 10 minutes or so, let's talk about how the investment case for AI. And I'll say what I have to say, what I think it is, and then you can share what your opinion is. I find it really interesting that ChatGPT blew my mind told me that I could code and it wasn't quite ready yet with 3.5. Once it became 4, it was ready. I was able to build these little initial applications. Then Claude Sonnet 3.5 came out, and all of a sudden I am now getting rate limited in the chatbot because I'm using it so much. I have to now buy a second account so I don't lose progress because I'm 90% dependent on this thing to code for me to build these applications. And I want to respond to something that you started out with as well, but I'll leave that. So it's now I can switch, which, if Meta comes out with their 405 billion parameter and it's good at coding, there's nothing sticking me to Claude. Like there's nothing, it's a commodity, but in different times, like most commodities like pork or copper stay the same. They don't innovate. Whereas this is rapidly innovating. So it's a rapidly innovating commodity. But I think you're right where it says like there's no investment case, because how are these guys going to get money out of this thing? Like it's not commodity. Like Meta just came out with a big model that they're going to be able to just like pour money into.
Yeah, and it's open source, but they're using all the money that the really interesting thing with Meta is to see, are they not investing in VR as much as they were back when everybody was saying they were spending too much? Because now they're spending kind of the equivalent amount on AI and neither one of them have a business model to pay for it. So they're just working off the income from Facebook. And so I think I saw a line somewhere where, yes, they're disinvesting in VR. Just recently, it just came out that they've laid off people, and they were talking about what they're investing in it.
Yeah.
They are investing in their Meta glasses, but not so much in the Quest and Oculus stuff, because they already have that. But it's never going to be a big thing. Kind of the beam. So right now, AI is being funded by excess profits and venture capital. And the excess profits are partially because, Meta makes a lot of money on Facebook. Google makes a lot of money on search. Microsoft makes a lot of money in general. All these people that are spending billions of dollars have billions of dollars to spend, and whether they put it into startup companies or do it themselves. So, and then there's the venture capital. Venture capital is actually, in this case, kind of a wart on the side of the log, because there's only a certain amount of VC going in. Most of it is being funded by both the profits and the investment of the big four, or whatever it is. That's part of why people say Apple's behind, but Apple has more money than God. So you really don't know how they're spending it, because they are secret.
Yeah.
And what I said when we started out is there's already the tail starting to happen on the AI investments, and there's probably going to be it's going to get worse before it gets better. So all the money that's been invested in AI has to be worked out to the point where there's something else that happens after that. And it's not just space or not just national defense. These are interesting things, but there has to be a perception about how AI gets baked in and people make money off of it. Microsoft can profit because they distribute along with everything into the enterprise. Google can, they're already beginning to compete, sort of step up their game in search, right? The search on Google is actually pretty good now. It gives you the summary, and like you don't really need to go any further, or you can if you want, but they give you that option. Was it Perplexity, I think, is considered the competitor in search, and maybe they'll carve out, Microsoft, Bing, and there were other search things, DuckDuckGo and stuff. So maybe Perplexity will share it with Google in an AI world, but so it's all got to sort out. All these companies, AI. I remember I went to, what the hell was it called? I went to a conference in San Francisco. It was the first AI conference, and they had everybody there. It's like all these companies that were announcing that they were doing AI for this or AI for that. I should go back and look at the program for that. See how many of those companies are still like. Yeah, Cerebral Valley, exactly. Yeah. And I went to the next one. It wasn't as interesting, so now they moved it to new. No, it's a separate one. But this is just the way things work, right? We're in that mode where it's visible. The top companies, the ones that have raised the most money, are still operating, but the little ones are disappearing, and people are wondering whether they're ever going to make money off of AI. And the only ones are the platform companies that already have income from something else.
It's funny, we talk about going back, but we keep on getting sucked into what's happening now, as opposed to the past. But I want to also make sure that, yeah.
Same thing. It's the same thing. People get interested in
Yeah.
this thing and get focused on it. You know, we've talked before about it. Is generative AI the endpoint, or is there something further along? And this is generally acknowledged. Is there a difference between generative AI and artificial general intelligence, general artificial, whatever it's called, AGI? And I believe there is, right? When we get to a form of AI, it does not require hundreds of billions of parameters and that can operate like the brain does in real time. That's real artificial intelligence. We're probably still 20 years away from that.
Cool.
Maybe I'm wrong, but.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for another episode of Stewart Squared. And you can find us on every Thursday on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes. So please hit subscribe.